Dr. Satan, the terrifying French serial killer of WW2 Paris. For a person's misdeeds to truly stand out during the atrocities of WW2, they must be truly irredeemable. Dr. Satan, also known as Marcel Petiot, was a particularly nasty serial killer who operated out of France during WW2. Dr. Satan, one question stands out. How did he get away with it for so long? Who was Dr. Satan? Marcel Petiot was born on the 17th of January 1897 in Auxerre, France. The writing was on the wall from an early age that something was missing in the psyche of Marcel. At the age of 11, he took his father's gun to class one day and fired it for seemingly no reason. Later that year he propositioned another 11-year-old for 6. These incidents led to the first of many school expulsions. As a teenager, Marcel robbed a postbox and was subsequently arrested for theft and damaging public property. This resulted in his first psychiatric evaluation. His criminal charges were dropped when he was diagnosed with a mental illness. His first run-in with the law did little to dissuade Marcel from his criminal exploits. He continued to be a delinquent and was repeatedly arrested. These later arrests led to his diagnosis being reaffirmed in 1914. The diagnosis of mental illness didn't stop the French army from accepting Marcel's application to join the war effort in 1916. He hadn't been serving for long when he was injured during the Second Battle of the Aisne. This led to another psychiatric evaluation during which he was diagnosed with having had a breakdown. This diagnosis meant he was shipped out to a series of rest homes. Military service had done nothing to straighten him out, and he was once again arrested, this time for stealing military blankets and morphine as well as the personal items of other recuperating servicemen. Marcel was sent to a psychiatric hospital in Fleury-les-Aubrais. He was, you guessed it, diagnosed with yet more mental illnesses. He was treated and shipped back out to the front in the June of 1918. This last deployment was cut short when he injured his foot with a grenade. He was diagnosed and sent home with a military pension. Dr. Satan becomes a doctor. When the war ended, Petiot joined the Accelerated Education Program for War Veterans. Within 8 months, Petiot had finished medical school and was working as an intern at Evros. For the first time in his life, he kept his head down and graduated in December 1921. He then moved to Villeneuve-sur-Yonne, where he wasted no time in going back to his criminal ways. He purposely got his patients hooked on addictive drugs and secretly applied for state medical assistance for his patients. This meant he was paid by both his patients and the government for each treatment, double dipping. It has also been claimed he carried out backroom abortions and stole from his patients. In 1926, Petiot met Louise Delavie, the daughter of an elderly patient. She is widely believed to have been his first murder victim. She disappeared in May of the same year. Neighbors reported seeing Petiot placing a large trunk in his car around the same time Delavie had disappeared. Police investigated but found nothing. A few weeks later, police pulled a similar trunk out of the Yonne River. It was full of unidentified female body parts. The scandal didn't slow Petiot down. He somehow became mayor that same year. The following year he married Georgette Leblay, the daughter of a wealthy landowner. Their son was born in 1928. Petiot's mayorship was full of various scandals, including embezzlement and theft as well as a healthy dose of fraud. He resigned in August 1931, but his charm was such that he still had many supporters. He was soon elected once again, but this time as a councillor. This proved to be short-lived. It was soon discovered he had been stealing electricity. By the time Petiot had lost his council seat, he had already moved to Paris to reinvent himself. Using fake credentials, he attracted wealthy patients and set up a well-respected practice at 66 Rue de Cormetin. He went back to his old habits of prescribing addictive drugs and committing fraud. He was also institutionalized for kleptomania around this time but was soon released. The rise of Dr. Satan. Up to this point, Petiot had proven himself to be mentally ill and largely without morals, but had done little to earn himself the name Dr. Satan besides his likely murder of Delavie. Suffice it to say, WW2 brought out the worst in this already deeply troubled man. Petiot managed to dodge the forced 1940 German draft of French civilians by forging disability certificates and continued his work as a doctor. He then began portraying himself as a hero. He claimed to be fighting the German occupation and being a part of the French resistance. In reality, under the guise of Dr. Eugene, he set up a fake escape network. He claimed to be able to get those who the Germans were persecuting out of France via passage to Argentina and other South American nations through Portugal. His price was 25,000 francs per person. Jews, resistance fighters, and convicted criminals were directed to Dr. Satan by 3 of Petiot's co-conspirators. He told these people that an inoculation was required for entry into Argentina. When they agreed to receive the inoculation, he would then inject them with cyanide. Once they had passed, he robbed them of their possessions and disposed of the bodies. At first, he simply began dumping bodies in the Seine. Once this became too risky, he changed tactics and submerged them in quicklime or burnt them. The Gestapo eventually got wind of what was going on. They had heard rumors of Dr. Satan's escape route and believed him to be affiliated with the resistance. They forced a prisoner, Robert Dreyfus, to approach the escape network, but he vanished into a lime pit most likely. Eventually, the Gestapo gathered enough evidence to arrest 3 of Petiot's accomplices, but they never got the man himself. Despite torturing the 3 men, the Gestapo never gained actionable intel on the resistance. It never seemed to occur to the Gestapo that this was because they were dealing with a serial killer, not a people smuggler. Discovery and capture. On March 11, 1944, Dr. Satan's luck finally ran out. His neighbors complained to the police of foul smells emanating from his home as well as large amounts of smoke coming from his chimney. Fearing a fire, the police summoned firemen and entered the house. They entered a house of horrors. In the basement were the buried remains of 10 people. In the roaring fire of the coal stove were yet more human remains. When they inspected the backyard, they found even more remains in a quicklime pit. The house was full of the suitcases, clothing, and personal property of his victims. The media soon caught wind of the story. A media circus followed, during which Petiot was dubbed Dr. Satan. Petiot, however, had escaped and managed to stay hidden for 7 months. He told friends that the police had found the bodies of Germans and informers he had killed for the cause. He managed to hide out until the liberation of Paris in 1944. Dr. Satan was finally caught on the 31st of October 1944 when he was recognized at a Paris metro station and arrested. Ever the con man, Dr. Satan believed he could get away with his crimes one last time. At his trial, he repeatedly claimed to have been a member of the resistance. He stated the bodies were those of informers and German conspirators. He claimed that they had been killed by his allies in the resistance, not him. This time his luck had run out. Dr. Satan had no allies in the resistance, and half the groups he claimed to have joined had never existed. He was eventually convicted of 26 counts of murder and sentenced to death. Dr. Satan was executed by beheading on the 25th of May 1946. Petiot was likely guilty of many more than 26 murders. He took the true number with him to the grave. Dr. Satan is a startling reminder of how evil men can slip through the cracks, especially in times of war. It begins not with a scream, but with smoke. On the 11th of March, 1944, in the heart of Paris, a city choking under the iron collar of Nazi occupation, a chimney coughed out a thick, oily, black plume. It was foul, a greasy smudge against the grey winter sky that clung to the air with a sweet, acrid stench so overpowering it clawed at the back of the throat. This was not the honest scent of burning wood or coal. This was something else, something organic and profoundly wrong. The smoke billowed from a handsome 4-story townhouse at 21 Rue Le Chour, a quiet, respectable street in the affluent 16th arrondissement. Neighbors, their nerves already frayed by 4 years of war, whispered, complained, and finally, someone called the police. They suspected a fire. They got a descent into hell. The man who owned that townhouse, who fed that monstrous chimney, was a doctor. A respected physician, a war hero, a charming, rotund man with a warm smile and eyes that danced with seemingly infinite intelligence. He was well liked, a family man with a fashionable wife and a teenage son, a man who made house calls and listened patiently to the ailments of the bourgeoisie. His name was Marcel André Henri Félix Petiot. But history would remember him by a different, more lurid name, whispered in the terrified dark of occupied Paris, Dr. Satan. This is not just a story of madness. It's a story of a crucible. The Second World War created a moral black hole in the center of European civilization, and within that vortex of fear, betrayal, and desperation, a predator of unimaginable cunning flourished. Marcel Petiot was not a simple monster of brutish violence. He was an artist of deception, a virtuoso of trust, who built a killing machine so cynical, so perfectly calibrated to the terror of his time, that it challenges our very definition of human evil. His instrument was hope. His payment was life. To understand the horror of 21 Rue Le Chour, we must first understand the man, and to understand the man, we must trace the cracks that ran through the foundation of his soul long before the first victim ever crossed his threshold. Marcel Petiot was born on January 17, 1897, in Auxerre, a medieval town in Burgundy. His childhood is a case study in the birth of a psychopath. Accounts from his early life are not filled with the usual rough and tumble of boyhood, but with a chilling string of antisocial acts that betray a fundamental brokenness. He was intelligent, undeniably so, but his intelligence was a cold, reptilian thing, focused entirely on manipulation and cruelty. He tortured animals, skinning cats alive. He was a serial thief, stealing from classmates and family. At school, he once brandished a revolver. A psychiatric assessment from his youth, a prophetic document, noted a complete lack of moral sense, diagnosing him with what we would now recognize as a severe antisocial personality disorder, characterized by sadism, mythomania, and perversity. They saw the absence, a void where empathy should be. Yet, the world seemed to conspire to protect him. When the First World War erupted, a 17-year-old Petiot saw not a national tragedy, but an opportunity for glory and, more importantly, a blank check for his worst impulses. He falsified his age and volunteered. He was sent to the trenches of the Somme, a charnel house of mud, blood, and industrial-scale death that was a finishing school for violence. Here, young Petiot's behavior was, by the standards of a world gone mad, both exemplary and deeply unnerving. He was wounded, receiving shrapnel in his hand and foot. He was later gassed. He won the Croix de Guerre, a medal for bravery. But what was this bravery? Fellow soldiers would later speak of a man who moved through the landscape of death with a serene, unblinking calm. He seemed to enjoy the killing. He was caught stealing morphine and a service revolver from a dead officer, but the chaos of the front provided cover. His most bizarre act was yet to come. He mailed letters to the families of fallen soldiers, posing as their grieving comrade, only to defraud them of money. He was finally institutionalized in a military psychiatric hospital, but the war's end and a sympathetic ear allowed him to slip through the net. The war, which shattered the psyches of millions, seemed to have completed Marcel Petiot. It gave him a taste for death and a doctor's coat to hide behind. After the war, life accelerated in a blur of grandiose schemes and petty crimes. He rode a wave of fraudulent heroism, leveraging his war record to enter an accelerated medical program. The man who emerged as Dr. Petiot was a fraud, but a skilled one. He set up a practice, first in the provincial town of Villeneuve-sur-Yonne, and quickly became popular. He had a magnetic charisma. He was generous with his time, a sharp dresser, and a powerful orator who was soon elected to the town council. But the darkness was always there, a predator's fin breaking. The smooth surface of his life. His first known murder, the overture to his Parisian Symphony of Death, occurred during this period. His mistress and patient, Louise Delavie, a baker's daughter, vanished in 1926. The official story was that she had run away with a lover, but Petiot's patient housekeeper, a woman named Jeanette Gall, also disappeared shortly after, just a week before she was to testify against him in a theft case. A pyromaniac, he had set fire to his own stable to destroy evidence, but traces of a body were found. Rumors swirled, whispers of illegal abortions, of a body dumped in the Yonne River. But no charges stuck. The charming doctor with the political connections was untouchable. He left the town under a cloud of suspicion, heading for the brighter, more anonymous lights of Paris in 1927. The small-town predator was about to find his hunting ground in the anonymity of the metropolis. In Paris, Petiot cultivated the ultimate facade of respectability. His practice on Rue de Courmartin was a front of bourgeois success. He treated famous actors, writers, and wealthy merchants. He was a voracious collector of antiques, his apartment a cluttered museum of paintings, armor, and rare books. He married the beautiful and well-connected Georgette Leblay, with whom he had a son, Gerard. He was the picture of a successful, urbane professional. But just beneath the veneer, the same frenetic, criminal energy pulsed. He was addicted to opiates, frequently arrested for petty theft, and balanced his books with bad checks and insurance fraud. He was a kleptomaniac, a pathological liar, a man whose life was a performance. And then, the Nazis marched into Paris. The city of light dimmed, its soul forced into hiding. For most Parisians, June 1940 was an apocalypse. For Marcel Petiot, it was an opportunity. The occupation imposed a new moral geometry on the world. The Gestapo, the SS, the Vichy Milice, these were the overt agents of evil. But the Gestapo did not create Dr. Satan. They merely provided the perfect terrifying cover for a monster already fully formed. The occupation was the perfect storm, a predator's paradise. A vast, desperate, and invisible population was created overnight. Jews, resistance fighters, downed Allied airmen, escaped prisoners of war, and simply anyone denounced by a jealous neighbor. They were all hunted, all desperate, all seeking the most precious commodity in occupied Paris, an exit. This was the market Petiot decided to corner. He conceived a plan of such breathtaking cynicism that it is hard to fathom. He would become a savior, a secret escape artist for the persecuted. He would offer them the ultimate hope, a passage to freedom. And then, he would murder them for everything they owned. He needed a stage for his final act. In 1941, he purchased the townhouse at 21 Rue Le Chour. It was the perfect location, a quiet, discreet building in a wealthy neighborhood, where residents don't ask questions. Over many months, he meticulously transformed it not into a home or a clinic, but into a purpose-built human slaughterhouse. The renovations were extensive, paid for with the spiraling mountain of cash his plan required, and carried out by unsuspecting laborers who believed the eccentric doctor's excuses. The building itself became a physical manifestation of his psychopathy. Let us walk through this house of horrors, not as tourists of the macabre, but to understand the cold, logistical precision of its creator. The elegant facade gave way to a labyrinth of death. He started with the basement. He had a room fitted with thick, soundproofed walls and a heavy, airtight, double-lock door. This was not a cellar, it was a gas chamber. On the wall, he installed a one-way glass peephole, a small, unbreakable window through which he could watch his victims die. The source of the lethal carbon monoxide was a simple internal combustion engine, a generator he had requisitioned, whose exhaust he could pipe directly into the sealed room. It was industrial killing, brought to the domestic sphere. Adjacent to the gas chamber was the disposal infrastructure. He had a deep, triangular pit dug directly in the floor of a second basement room, filling it with quicklime, a caustic substance that would dissolve flesh and bone. 4 bulkier remains. He had 2 furnaces, one a large coke-burning stove and another smaller one, whose flue was connected directly to the chimney that would, years later, spew the telltale smoke. The building's layout, with a private courtyard and a garage, allowed him to bring victims into the house unseen. The full picture is staggering. A physician, sworn to preserve life, had built a meticulously engineered, private death camp in the middle of occupied Paris, under the nose of the Gestapo. With his stage built, Dr. Satan began his performance. The script was always the same, a masterpiece of predatory empathy. Petiot and his ring of touts, shadowy figures who moved through the cafes and black market underworld of the city, identified the desperate. They targeted the very people the regime was hunting: wealthy Jewish families who had seen their businesses seized and their relatives deported to the unknown horror in the East, smugglers, gangsters, and members of the resistance who needed to vanish. The pitch was irresistible. Dr. Eugene, one of his many aliases, was a patriot, the head of a secret escape network called Flytox, funded by the Free French and British intelligence. For a fee, everything changes hands. For a fee in a black market, he would guide them out of France to safety in Argentina or Spain. The fee was everything. And this was the ultimate, fatal genius of his plan. The victims were not just to be killed, they were to be systematically plundered. They were told they could not take their wealth with them: no gold, no jewels, no cash, no foreign currency that would mark them as fleeing Jews. They must convert everything they owned into portable, untraceable wealth: diamonds sewn into the linings of suitcases, gold coins, and stacks of French francs. They were instructed to bring everything. They were told to bring the very poison that would kill them, for no body would be found. The entire escape was a secret. They were to tell no one, not friends, not family. They would simply vanish, and so they would leave no one to look for them. They packed their lives into suitcases, kissed their tearful families goodbye forever with secret smiles of hope, and walked willingly, unprotestingly, into the abyss. The final act of Petiot's play was a choreography of disarming professionalism. A victim, let's say a whole family, a father, a mother, a grandmother, perhaps 2 children, arrives at 21 Rue Le Chour, their hearts pounding with a mix of fear and wild hope. They are welcomed by the doctor himself, not in a white coat, but in a smart suit, radiating warmth and authority. He is calm, professional, and fatherly. He offers them a glass of medicine, a bitter herbal concoction he insisted was a required typhus vaccine for the journey. This was not a vaccine. It was a heavy, rapidly acting sedative, likely a dissolved barbiturate. As the drug took hold and the world began to soften and blur, he would lead them, drowsy and trusting, not to a hidden room, but to the disinfection chamber, a necessary step before the long trip. He would usher them into the soundless, triangular room, reassuring them that the strange smell was just the medication. He would then close the thick, airtight door behind them, the lock clicking shut with a heavy, final sound. And then, he would walk deliberately to the generator, start its engine, and turn a valve. He would then return to his observation post, settling himself before the one-way peephole. We can only imagine what went through his mind as he watched, a voyeur to the ultimate horror. The family would grow dizzy, then collapse, convulsing in a silent, macabre ballet as the invisible gas asphyxiated them. The high-pitched hum of the generator would have masked any last, muffled cries. It took time. It was not instantaneous. He watched them die, one by one, until the tangled heap of bodies lay still. He had killed entire families in a single batch, watching the process with a clinical, and we can only assume, deeply gratified eye. After the killing, the real work began. The transformation from respected doctor to grave robber. He would strip the bodies of their clothes and violently dismember them with surgical precision, a grisly mockery of his trade. The pile of limbs and torsos would be fed into the furnaces or cast into the quicklime pit, where the chemical reaction would begin its own slow, bubbling destruction. The evidence was being methodically erased. But the human body is stubborn. Bone, especially, resists annihilation. Even in the lime pit, teeth, finger bones, and the denser parts of the skeleton would not fully dissolve. This gruesome debris, mixed with personal effects, was hauled up in buckets and scattered in vacant lots, thrown into the Seine, or used to fill the courtyard. Then, there was the luggage. The heart of the operation. In a locked room on the first floor, a fortune in suitcases was piled to the ceiling. Their contents, meticulously sorted, were the payoff. Priceless paintings, Persian rugs, diamond rings pried from cold, dead fingers, gold coins, wads of foreign currency. From each victim, he harvested a life's entire material accumulation. Petiot was a master of disposal. He had a network of bicycle messengers who would transport these valuables, piece by piece, to the black market. He became a familiar, if mysterious, figure, a big-spending bourgeois gentleman known as Monsieur Valery, who paid for silk stockings, champagne, and art with a river of cash and gold. The sheer scale of the property theft was industrial, yet no trace of the original owners remained. 4 years, this operation ran with horrifying smoothness. The Nazis were deporting thousands, people vanished every day. Who would notice a few more, especially those who had deliberately cut all ties in preparation for their escape? The Gestapo, for its part, was completely unaware of Dr. Satan's true nature, but was intensely interested in the Flytox network. They believed the rumors. To them, Petiot was not a serial killer, but a mastermind of a far-flung resistance cell, a man who was smuggling Jews and downed airmen out of occupied territory right under their noses. They wanted him desperately. In a twist of supreme irony, the Gestapo became the hunters of a man they believed was a hero of the Resistance, while he was, in fact, simply killing the very people they were hunting. This secret war of hunters came to a head in the spring of 1943. The Gestapo, using electronic surveillance on a member of Petiot's network, cracked the code. They listened in, horrified, as an associate was heard to exclaim, "Petiot hasn't paid me. He's a bastard." They thought they had found the linchpin of the French resistance. A German commando squad was assembled and, in May 1943, they arrested Marcel Petiot on the street. He was thrown into the notorious Fressens prison. They interrogated him for 8 months, using all their well-honed techniques of psychological pressure and brutality. They demanded names, networks, and landing strips. Petiot, the consummate liar, gave them nothing but a web of fabulous fiction. He admitted to being in the resistance, to heading a great escape network, but spun tales so elaborate and so unverifiable that the Gestapo was left frustrated. They could not find his mythical arm caches, his phantom agents, or any evidence of his supposed heroism. Crucially, they never searched 21 Rue Le Choix. The very thing they had him for was a lie, and the monstrous truth, the mass murder right under their feet, they completely missed. Deeming him a low-level, if insufferable, crook, they released him in January 1944. He walked out of a Gestapo prison, a man who had murdered dozens, freed by the very regime that would have executed him for the acts they mistakenly attributed to him. The predator was back on the street. The beginning of the end came not from the Gestapo's intelligence, but from a chimney's insistent, sickening smoke. The complaints on March 11, 1944, finally forced the hand of the authorities. 2 policemen from the neighborhood precinct, Not the Gestapo, not the Resistance, but two ordinary beat cops who knew a foul smell when they encountered it, knocked on the door of 21 Rue Le Choix. No one answered. They found a fireman who scaled the wall of the courtyard. He dropped down into a scene from Dante. The courtyard was a charnel house, a litter of human remains. A bucket held a jumble of partly dissolved hands. A pile of opened, bloody luggage was stacked against a wall. The stench was overwhelming. When the police finally forced entry into the building itself, they recoiled. Inside were the tools of an industrial-scale abattoir. They found the soundproofed, triangular room with its peephole. They found the lime pit, whose bubbling surface was a grotesque soup of decomposing human matter. They pulled from it the recognizable remnants of a skull. They found the furnaces, still hot, with fragments of charred bone in the ash. The deeper they dug, the worse it got. In the stables, they found a huge mound of quicklime covering more remains. The personal effects of at least a dozen different people, scattered like garbage, a ration card of a 25-year-old woman, the shoe of a child, a diary, hundreds of identity cards. The full tally would eventually reveal the remains of at least 27 people, with clues pointing to dozens more. A discovery of suitcases alone, over 50 of them, spoke of a victim count that was likely to be uncountable. And the man who owned this house of horrors? Marcel Petiot was nowhere to be found. The news broke like a thunderclap across Paris. The butcher of Le Choix, the press called him. Dr. Satan. The city was gripped by a macabre fascination and a chilling, retroactive terror. How many had vanished? Who were they? The narrative initially, and falsely, painted him as a Nazi agent, luring resistance fighters to their deaths. This was a more comfortable story, an externalization of evil onto the occupier. But the truth was far more disturbing. The victims were not just resistance heroes, they were the most vulnerable, the most hopeful. The list of the vanished and identified reads like a tragic census of terror. Joachim Guscheneau, a Jewish furrier, Martha Kite, a mother who fled with her children, the Wolfson family, the Neller brothers. They were good, desperate, innocent people who had placed their ultimate hope in the hands of the devil. A massive manhunt, the largest in Parisian history, erupted. Every gendarme was on the lookout for the pudgy doctor with the dueling scars on his face. But Petiot was a ghost. He had a phenomenal talent for disappearance. For 7 months, he evaded capture. He grew a beard, hid in plain sight with friends, and even brazenly joined the Resistance under a new alias, Captain Henri Villet, after the city was liberated in August 1944. The ultimate chameleon, he seamlessly slid into the role of a war hero, now fighting the retreating Germans. There are even accounts that he was a part of the final street battles for Paris, the liberator who was, in fact, its most cynical mass murderer. He was finally caught on October 31, 1944, not by a brilliant piece of detective work, but by simple human recognition. He was recognized at a Paris metro station by a fellow Resistance fighter who remembered his peculiar mannerisms. When arrested, he was carrying a pistol in one pocket and a scrapbook of newspaper clippings about his own crimes in the other. The narcissism of the man knew no bounds. The trial of Marcel Petiot, which began in March 1946, was a media circus that exposed the raw, unhealed wound of the occupation. He stood in the dock, theatrically, endlessly verbose, playing the part of the wronged patriot. His defense was as audacious as his crimes. He completely admitted to all the killings. He had to, the evidence was overwhelming. But he claimed that every single person he had dismembered and dissolved in quicklime was a Nazi collaborator or a German agent. The Flytox network was real, he insisted, a death squad of the Resistance, and he was only following orders to eliminate enemies of France. He claimed the suitcases full of possessions were not from his victims, but were left with him by other agents. The sheer scale was irrelevant, he was a patriot. When asked why his house was so thoroughly equipped for murder, he had a stunning, brazen answer. The secret room? It was an air raid shelter. The lime pit? For a sewage project. The one-way peephole? A simple decorative window. He spun these lies with a straight face, a virtuoso performance. But forensic evidence, the testimony of a few who had escaped his trap, and the sheer monstrosity of the physical evidence, including a wallet found in the lime pit belonging to a man Petiot had claimed was still alive, demolished his story. One of the most damning witnesses was his own son, Gerard, who testified that his father had forced him to carry heavy suitcases into the basement. On May 25, 1946, the jury found him guilty of 26 counts of murder. He was sentenced to death. In the early dawn of the same day, as a spring sun rose over the city he had defiled, Marcel Petiot was led out and placed on the guillotine at the Santy prison. The man known as Dr. Satan, who had witnessed so many final, terrifying moments through his glass peephole, was himself strapped to the bascule. A single flash of the blade, and it was over. The 27th victim of 21 Rue Le Chour was the killer himself. But the story doesn't end cleanly with the falling blade. The true horror of Dr. Satan is not just the tally of his murders, which likely reached over 60, perhaps many more. The true horror is the mirror he holds up to humanity in extreme circumstances. His evil was not the frothing, maniacal violence of a monster easily identified and cast out. It was a fully conscious, rationally planned, and cynically executed enterprise system of murder, built on the very best of human feelings, love of family, the will to survive, and trust. He was a predator who wore the white coat of a doctor and the halo of a savior. Marcel Petiot was a psychopath, certainly, a clinical anomaly who entered the world without a conscience. But the war was the catalyst, the great darkening that allowed a latent monster to become a super predator. The occupation created the vast pool of desperate, disoriented victims and provided the perfect camouflage of mass chaos. What is most chilling is the unease, the vertiginous feeling that in a time of such total moral breakdown, the line between the hero and the monster could be so easily and fatally blurred. He was investigated, arrested, and even imprisoned by the Gestapo, not for his monstrous murders, but on suspicion of being a great hero of the resistance. That a serial killer could be mistaken for a freedom fighter is the ultimate, damning epitaph for a world at war. The smoke that rose from the chimney at 21 Rue Le Chour on a March day in 1944 was a signal fire. It was the world's first glimpse of a private atrocity so complete, so perfectly adapted to a time of public horror, that it still has the power to make us recoil, to question what thin veneer of civilization separates us from the abyss. Dr. Satan was not the devil. He was far worse. He was a man, a doctor, a father, a neighbor, who looked at the most desperate people in the world, offered them his hand, and with a warm, reassuring smile, led them to their death.